today's webinar, we're going to be receiving our content or presentation from my colleague on the extended cabinet, Diane Knudsen, who is our Executive Director of Finance and Administration. And I'll spotlight her video in a moment so you can see her, but you can see her thumbnail probably at the top of the screen right now. Later on, we're going to have an opportunity for questions and answers with Diane. She's probably got about a 30 to 40 minute presentation prepared for you. Then there'll be some time for Q&A. And so if you do have questions you would like to ask, you can do so by pressing that button on the bottom of your Zoom window that says Q&A, and you can enter your question there. But I will say that it would be helpful for you to not put your questions in there until Diane has finished the presentation. What we found out last week was that folks would be putting in their questions, and excellent questions, but we'd find out that our presenter was going to answer many of those questions through the presentation itself. So why don't we hold on to our questions until we get through the presentation, and then when we enter our Q&A time, you can type them in there. In the question and answer session, my job is to read those questions and then give them to Diane so she can respond to them. So that will help you understand how the webinar platform works. One other thing I'll say to you, that in the chat window, if you open that, you will be able to send a message to all the panelists. There's a little menu right above where you type in the chat window, and you'll see a little pop-up menu, and it will say either all panelists, or it will say all panelists and participants. So if you only want the panelists, that's in this case, Diane, myself, or Selby to see your message, you would have that menu selected to just panelist. But if you want everyone to see your message, you could say all panelists and participants on that little pop-up menu, and then everyone who's in the webinar would be able to see it. So we want to thank you for coming to our Wednesday webinar. Selby is going to be telling you later on toward the end of our time together about what's going to be coming next week. We have a whole series of Wednesday webinars planned. We're excited to be able to share them with you. These webinars are designed to equip and empower you in the local church to be able to manage and to move forward in ministry during this really challenging time, as all of our churches are dealing with the stay-at-home order in Nevada and California, and the restrictions we have about gathering for worship together. And so these Wednesday webinars are designed to help support and encourage the ministry that you're doing. Every webinar is going to be recorded. We're going to be setting up a web page where you'll be able to find a catalog of all of the Wednesday webinars so you can watch them afterwards. If you were with us last week for Jason Moore's presentation, we'll hopefully have that posted by the end of this week or beginning of next week, so you'll be able to watch that. And then what will happen is when the webinar is over, you're going to receive an email that will let you know that you can correspond with Diane if you have more questions in detail you want to ask her later. And there's also going to be a link for a survey that we would really like for you to fill out for us so that we can hear your feedback, because we really want to improve these webinars on a weekly basis. We realize this is week 2 of our Wednesday webinars, so we have lots of good improvements we can make, and by doing that evaluation, we can hear from you about what we can do to make these better week in and week out. And so with that said, I think I'm going to turn things over to Diane. Diane, I'm so thankful for you. Glad that you're with us, and looking forward to your leadership today.
Oh, thank you, Craig, and thank you, Tua and Selby as well. It's a pleasure to be with you all today, and thank you for taking some time out of a busy week to learn more about these matters. I am going to share my screen with you all. I have a little PowerPoint presentation for us. I am going to start at the beginning though, so ignore that for a minute. Boom. Show from the beginning. Here we go. So again, thank you for taking time out of this Holy Week to consider ways to help your church. You're already doing remarkable work to keep your community connected and supported. I know that. And while great needs exist in our communities, we also have great resources among us. Please don't forget to give your people every opportunity to financially support your church this Easter. Tell them where to send their checks. If you have online giving, please direct them to your website. We are an important piece of the puzzle to get people through this time, and I hope you'll be bold in asking your congregation for its financial assistance. Anyway, thank you. Now on to the technical matters. I am here today to help you understand some of the unique, unusual, whatever the word is, really remarkable opportunities have come to churches just in the last week or so from Congress. I'm going to cover three things. We have the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, called the CARES Act. That's primarily what I'm covering today. This piece of legislation was passed on March 22nd. It's 800 pages long. It has you can imagine how many components it has. It's really the basic fundamental part of Congress's economic stimulus for this country during this time. But the three pieces of the legislation that I will try to cover with you during these 40 minutes or so: Paycheck Protection Program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Advance, and the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. Most of this time we'll be talking about the Paycheck Protection Program. That's the program I'm getting lots and lots of questions about right now. All right, so what is this Paycheck Protection Program? The goal for this program is to help small businesses and nonprofits retain all of our employees during this time. So the goal is not to necessarily, for this program, is not to necessarily give out money or to help people on unemployment. This particular program wants us to keep our employees and wants to give small businesses all the support they can have to keep from laying people off. All of our churches are eligible for this. We'll talk about the details of eligibility in a minute. The application for this program has to go through a bank or a credit union. So that is where the frustration is right now, and I'll speak to that concern as well. The loans do not require a guarantor or a mortgage, so that's really unique to have a loan from a doesn't require any kind of security. The amount of the loan is calculated by us, by you, as 2.5 months of your payroll costs, and I'll go through how to do that calculation. And finally, the loans are forgivable if we use them for our payroll expenses in the first 8 weeks after we get the money. So I touch on all of these points here. Eligibility point, almost every small business in the country is eligible for this program, which is why the banks are one of the reasons the banks are so overwhelmed right now. The only eligibility requirements are that you are in operation on February 15th, you have 500 or fewer employees, you need the funds to support your ongoing operations, and you don't have any employees whose principal place of residence is of the United States. So you can imagine that covers a lot of ground, lots of people. There is $349 billion set aside for this program, but the general consensus is that it won't be enough. So even yesterday, Congress is considering extending it in terms of the amount of money to help reach all the people that are eligible, excuse me, all the businesses that are eligible. And also they are considering the fact that 2.5 months might not be enough time. All right. So the first step in the Paycheck Protection Program is for you to find a bank that you can use to apply for this program. And in all of my conversations in the past week or so, it seems pretty clear that in order to achieve this, you're going to have to apply your own bank. And so the frustration, of course, is that maybe your bank is not one of the banks that's currently participating, doesn't have any history being a small business administration lender. And so in that case, your bank might be working to become quickly a small business administration lender, but that can take some time. So here are a few of the banks that I know are at least trying to receive and process these applications. The Bank of America has had some struggles in that they they have not only required their applicants to be their customers, that they've required them to not only have a checking account, but to also have a loan with them in order to be able to apply for this. I'm on the list with US Bank. I get emails from them. They are processing applicants for only applicants that are their current customers, but they say that they will get around to non-customers. I participated in a webinar with the Federal Credit Union yesterday. They are not quite up to receiving applications yet. They're awaiting approval from the SBA, Small Business Administration. And when they do get up and running, if that is your bank or your credit union, you may want to go with them, but just know that they are limiting their loans under this program to $25,000 per church and $250,000 for each annual conference. Now, I thought Chase would be the great lender, the sort of hopeful lender, but they too have cut off their own customers right now. That's what I'm hearing today from a church in our conference. So that's discouraging. There's one little bit of hope that I saw in the New York Times yesterday. This is an article about what a scramble it's been with lenders in this program, and they named a couple of lenders that are processing applications for non-customers. So I leave that to you. Those were the names of the lenders that they named in their article yesterday. One is called Ready Capital, and one is called Cabbage. So maybe if we Google those, we can find it. I can find the links for those and send them out on our website as well. So there is a little bit of hope. So I guess the moral to the story is talk to your banker first. If there's zero hope of being able to apply for this program with your own bank or credit union, then you might try one of these lenders that the New York Times mentioned in its article yesterday. Okay. So what's this application look like? I'm going to jump out of here for just a minute from the slideshow and show you how simple this application is. Many of you have already done it. Many of you have it sitting in front of you. This is the easy part. Finding the bank or the credit union is really the only hard part about this. The application is 2 pages. It says 4 here, but the last 2 pages just instructions. So you're on the application, you check that you're a 501c3 nonprofit, put the name of the church, your address. Your employer identification number is the number the IRS assigned to your church. It's the number that you use on all of your payroll reports to the IRS, including your W-2s and your W-3. So that's where you will find your employer identification number. It's important that this program is managed and administered really by employer identification number. So you may have a preschool, you may have a lot of people on your payroll in the eyes of the IRS aren't necessarily in your eyes employees of the church, but as long as this entity is using your EIN, they are being administered and you're applying for this program for them as well.
Diane, I don't want to interrupt you, but the screen sharing is of the PowerPoint slide. So if you want to show us the website, stop sharing that screen and share your web browser so we can see the application with you.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're not seeing the application.
No, we're still seeing the PowerPoint slide.
Okay.
So just change your screen sharing real quick.
Oh, okay. Hang on a sec. Over. Okay, got it. Sorry about that, folks.
Nope,
So
we see it now. Thank you.
Now, okay, sorry about that. So here is the application. Again, it's very simple. It's a 2-page document. You're checking the box that says you're a 501c3. Your name in. You're putting your employer identification number in. And so that's easy. And really, there's just these 3 boxes that you fill in that involve numbers. There's an average monthly payroll that you see here. And that is a number that I'm going to, that you're going to calculate, but I'll go through that with you shortly. Whatever that number turns out to be, you take it times 2.5 and put the result there. Easy. And then over here, you're putting the number of employees. I would suggest for the number of employees, you put in the number of employees that were on your payroll at the end of the year, at the end of 2019. You could also put in the your number of W-2s, but I think the better way to go is just to put in the number of employees you had at the end of the year. The only other thing I want to mention here is that you'll notice right in this box, as you take this average monthly payroll times 2.5, it says something about an EIDL. That refers to the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. And if you applied for that, you would have gotten a $10,000 advance. And if you did that, you would subtract that when you get to this box over here. So this Economic Injury Disaster Loan is another program I'm going to cover before I'm done, but it would only be advancing you $10,000. If you do it and you get it, it will affect the amount you get over here in your loan for the Paycheck Protection Program. All right, now very quickly, you just go through here, and I would expect all of you churches would be checking the box here for payroll and for utilities. So the interesting thing about this program is you're basing, the loan amount is based totally, again, on this calculation of your average monthly payroll, that you can use it not only for payroll, but you can also use it for utilities. And if you have a lease or you're paying rent, you can use it for that as well. You do have to use at least 75% of this amount for payroll, but you can use it for these other things as well. You can't use it for anything if you want to get it forgiven later, and I'll cover that piece in a little bit. The other thing that trips our churches up a bit on this form is we need to put a person's name in that blank. Obviously, this form is intended for a small business, not necessarily a not-for-profit. We don't have an owner name we can put in that, but my bank at least wanted me to input the name of our trustees chairperson. So he agreed to allow me to do that. So I put in the name of the trustees chairperson, his title, under this column called ownership percentage. That's where I put the word nonprofit. But I did put in his social security number and his address. So that's what my bank needed. I know some of you have already submitted this, and you've already just written something like nonprofit organization here without submitting a name, which is what I did originally. And your bank might be okay with that. But if you want to be safe, put in the chair of the Board of Trustees on that line. And then you're just checking a few boxes. The other thing to mention is that the chair of the trustees that you put here doesn't necessarily have to be the person signing this form and answering these questions. It's great if they're available to do that. But if not, then I would suggest you find another officer of your corporation, either the secretary or the person named as the treasurer for your corporation, and have them fill out the check marks. And then these all require initials next to the check boxes, and some more initials and a signature. So again, this doesn't say owner down here. It says authorized representative. I would suggest you make that one of your corporate officers. Okay. We want to make it as easy as possible for these banks and credit unions to understand us, and they don't generally deal with churches. So my thinking is, now I'm going to go back and share differently now. Hang on. My thinking is we want to make it easy for them, right? So I'm going to show you one thing that I suggest. Boom, here we go. There we go. I think I'm back in this. Can you see that application now, folks?
I see your PowerPoint again,
Diane. PowerPoint now. Okay, great. Thank you, Craig. So this is just Diane talking. I suggest to make it easier for your lender that whether they ask for it or not, that you include in with your application your statement of information if you're a California corporation, or if you're in Nevada, that you include a screen print of a print screen of your Secretary of State's listing of your officers of your corporation. So again, if you click on this link for a California corporation, it will take you to the Secretary of State website. And I might go ahead and do it since we really do have time. I'll have to share the screen differently. Bear with me 1 minute. I'm going to do it. I'm going to stop that share. I'm going to start another share. Boom. There it is. So here we are on the Secretary of State website. That's where this link took us. And this is how you get the statement of information that you need. Put your church name there. You do, let's say, Central United Methodist Church. Browse down. You find your Central United Methodist Church. Let's say Stockton. And then right here is a PDF that shows who the Secretary of State thinks are your corporate officers. These are the people you've submitted as your corporate officers. So again, this person should be your chair of your trustees, and that's the person you'd put as your owner. But Susie or Connie for Stockton could be the person submitting the form on Central Stockton's behalf. So I suggest making it easy, again, make it easy for these lenders and give them this piece of paper, print this off and give it to them or send it to them so that they can be sure of who's signing this form, and they don't have to ask for minutes of meetings maybe. Hopefully they can just see it right there. All right, so I'm going to go back to the presentation. Hang on 1 more minute. There we go. So again, here's the link for California. Here's the link for Nevada. The other thing that I want you to send with your application that they may or may not ask for is I want us to prove to our lender that we are a nonprofit organization. So the easiest way to do that is to go to this website. It's the website of the denomination's Council on Finance and Administration. We are all of our churches are nonprofit organizations by virtue of us being part of a group ruling under our denomination. And this website will take you to a place where you put in your employer identification number, and it'll give you a letter that explains that your church, it names your church specifically, is part of this group ruling, and it also gives you all the paperwork related to the group ruling and the determination letter from the Internal Revenue Service. So go ahead and send that with your application as well, so they can have proof that you are a nonprofit organization. And I also want you to send in your W-2s and your W-3 for the year. And that has to do with the proof of this payroll calculation we're about to do together. Now, the one thing I might mention is that, the easiest way to do this payroll calculation is to use calendar year 2019, in which case the W-2s and the W-3 would be the right documentation. If there's some reason that you would rather use the most recent 12 months, which would be second, third, fourth quarter of 2019 or first quarter of 2020, you can do that. But you will probably be asked to, instead of submitting W-2s and W-3, to submit the 4941 report that you submit to the IRS every quarter. So that's a possibility. The only real scenario I can imagine where that would be the way to go would be if you hired, let me think, if you had already, let me put it this way, if you had less employees in the first quarter of 2020 than you had in 2019, right? No, I think you'd rather do it. You were trying to maximize, it's a fine line, I know it's a fine line here, but you want to kind of maximize the payroll cost, right? But you then have to remember that you have to demonstrate in the first 8 weeks after you receive the loan that you haven't let people go. So maybe it would be better in the interest of making sure this loan is forgiven to use the 12-month period where you have the lowest number of full-time equivalents. That's confusing, I know, but bear with me, I'll go through it with you. So moving on to the next slide, hopefully. Come on. Okay. Here is an example of a calculation. Now, I'll just say right now, this afternoon, I'm already in an argument with my own bank about this calculation. So, have to know that every single bank is doing this differently. But this is what I've submitted. This kind of format is what I submitted to our bank at the conference. I knew that they were already asking for the W-2s and the W-3, and I wanted to show them how to get from the taxable wages they saw on the W-2 and this total that would be on the W-3 to the amount that I was claiming. The amount that I was claiming is really this gross salary. And then the only caveat to that is in this rule, once you get to the gross salary, it cannot exceed $100,000. So you'll see here for Pastor Peacock, as an example, obviously, I put in $75,000 worth of wages. They have a housing allowance. They have $10,000 of their own money that they had withheld and put into their pension. So their gross salary was oops, didn't mean to do that. So I don't know, can I go back? How do we go back? Hang on a second. I don't know how to go back, so I'm going to go through it and then I'm going to go back. Sorry, folks, didn't mean to click it. So, hold on a second. I'm going to move you up there. I'm going to share my screen again. All right, so I'm going to share my presentation one more time. And I'm going to go to the spreadsheet. There it is. Okay, here we are. I'll keep my hands off the keyboard. Okay, so we've got a pastor who makes more than $100,000 in gross salary, but the loan calculation is limited to the $100,000. Okay, so to cut to the chase, I came down here and you can see that the total of the loan calculation starts with this subtotal of 189,667 right there. I can add in all of the employer paid pension during this year. I can add in all the health premiums that were paid by the employer this year. Then I get this total for the year of 2019 of $239,000. I'm dividing that by 12 to get a monthly average for the 12 months. And I get the monthly average is the number you put in that first box of the application. Take it times 2.5 and you get the number that you put in the second box of the application. So at the moment, my bank is arguing with me about they didn't want to use box 1, they wanted to use box 5, which would exclude every salary of every clergy person. So we're having a conversation about that. But there are other banks in the country, I'm told, that are excluding the clergy housing allowance, but they're not excluding the clergy altogether. So it really does depend on your bank, and I've certainly not done arguing with my bank yet about that. So what do? Let's say you get the loan and you're ready to spend it. These are the things you have to be careful to spend it on. Oh, darn it, I did it again. I gotta stop touching the screen. So the things you have to spend the loan on is your payroll costs, obviously. If you pay rent or if you have a mortgage, again, you can spend it on that. If you have utilities expenses, you can spend it on that. Those are the same things that were listed on the application. So to summarize, you're calculating the loan based on only on payroll costs for 2.5 months, but then in the first 8 weeks after you get this loan, you can spend it not only on payroll costs, but on utilities and rent and mortgage interest. So these are the things you have to do during those 8 weeks again to make sure that this amount is totally forgiven. Like I said, you can spend it on only on these particular things. You also have to be careful that you have not decreased the salary of anyone making under $100,000 by more than 25%. And they're going to want to see that you have not reduced your payroll. You have not let people go or made people off. So you're going to have to demonstrate that you have at least the same number of full-time equivalents during those 8 weeks as you had in either February through June of 19 or the first 2 months of 2020. So I'm not going to go through with you how to calculate a full-time equivalent, but you're welcome to call me or email me, and I'll once you get the loan, I'll go over that with you. Summarize to get through the Paycheck Protection Program. 4 steps, really. The first one is the hardest. Again, find a lender. Contact your district superintendent, let them know you're interested in this, and they can arrange to have a charge conference for you. Calculate your average monthly payroll costs as per my spreadsheet, and then fill information by the right people. All right, so we're doing pretty well on time. I'm going to take a moment to talk about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Advance. This is also part of the, I think this is also part of the CARES Act. This is a much easier process. You can go directly to that, to the SBA website and apply for this $10,000. It's called an advance. And what do I want to say about that? I guess what I would say about that is if you do this payroll calculation for the Paycheck Protection Program and the amount of the loan that you qualify for is around $10,000, then it might be a lot easier to just apply for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan instead of the Paycheck Protection Program. But this particular program, you just go on the SBA website, you apply for it, you get it. It's supposed to be within 3 days. I doubt that that's really happening. But then you have the $10,000, and the restrictions on it are much less than the restrictions on the use of the Paycheck Protection Program. So in that case, in that scenario, you would be choosing between the 2 programs. You couldn't do both, but you would be easier to get the $10,000 through this program. If you want to do both, you could, but again, the $10,000 you get from this program has to be subtracted from the loan you would be getting from the Paycheck Protection Program. Okay, moving on. The other piece of information, the other piece of the CARES Act that I wanted to mention today is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. We don't know a lot about this yet because unemployment insurance is very specific to each state. And as you can imagine, every unemployment office right now in every state is just overwhelmed. So we don't have any clarity about this necessarily yet, but we believe, the chancellor and I and other chancellors across the country believe that this particular part of the CARES Act will make church employees eligible for unemployment during 2020. We don't know that for sure yet, but that certainly sounds like that from the legislation. The other thing we don't know is whether or not if our employees apply for unemployment, whether that will create a bill for our churches. It might. So obviously it's better to not put people in unemployment and to keep them on the payroll using these other mechanisms that I've described. All right, thank you for your time. Let's take some time for question and answer, and I'll stop sharing the screen.
All right, Diane, I'm unmuted, but I'm not going to put my video up. I'm going to try to put some, I've been answering some of the questions that I know, keeping in mind I'm about 5 feet from my CPA wife, who's actually been helping me answer some of the easy questions. But one of the questions that came up from Bob is he's asking, can the church include 1099 employees like gardeners or cleaning services? And I think the answer to that is no, but please tell me what you understand that to be.
Originally that was a piece of confusion because the law itself, which is again 880 pages, sort of sounds like it includes them, but it really doesn't. What it is saying in that
She's
piece of legislation is that um, if perhaps you are a church that doesn't do payroll at all, maybe your only employee is your pastor. In that situation, you wouldn't be doing a regular payroll all the time. And even though you should be giving them a W-2, it's at the end of the year, it's possible that you've given them a 1099 instead. So in that scenario, I would say you could apply for this program with just your 1099 from your pastor. And if I was doing that, I would go ahead and include my 1099 from my gardener and my organist too. But I don't know if it would get accepted or not. But for the most part, you can't do both, right? You need to do either your payroll. If all you do is give out 1099s, you might be able to qualify for this, but you can't mix them.
okay. Thanks, Diane.
Yeah.
I have another question from Lori. It's a little longer, but there may be churches that are in the same situation, so bear with me.
Sure.
Lori writes that our church musician resigned and moved out of state at the end of February. And we were early in the hiring process, hadn't interviewed any candidates yet when the shelter-in-place order happened. So we are going to actually have fewer employees than we did in 2019. How would that impact our application for the PPP?
Well, the application will still go through. It's just the calculation on the forgiveness that might be affected. So even if you end up having less full-time equivalents during this 8 weeks than you had during the other period of time, either 2019 or the first 2 months of 2020, you'll still have most of your PPP amount forgiven. It's based on a ratio. So if you say 10%, you are 10% lower amount of employees than you had before, then 90% of your loan would be forgiven, 10% wouldn't be forgiven. So you still want to apply for it, definitely. And the loan itself is really quite reasonable. I'm told it could be anywhere from 0.5% interest to 4% interest, depending on your lender. I don't know if that's true. Payments for the loan are deferred for 6 to 12 months. You have 2 to 10 years to pay it off. That might depend on your lender as well. And there's no prepayment penalty. So even if you have a sliver of this amount that's left as a loan, it's a very reasonable loan, and I would encourage you to go ahead with the program.
All right, I got some more questions I want to put to you. One person wants to know if the EIDL, the loan, is it forgivable just like the PPP loan is if you meet the qualifications?
The EIDL is a program that you can borrow a lot of money from, but what I'm really talking about is applying for the EIDL advance, which is $10,000, and that is just a grant.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
The one person's asking, Randy is asking, and I'm inferring into his question, he says, how do we show how much we've used for each purpose? So when you get the loan and you actually spend it, how do you evidence that you used the 75% of it on payroll expenses? Is it on the honor system, or is someone going to check?
The lenders are definitely going to check. I don't know if the documentation goes all the way to the SBA or not, but the lenders are going to ask you for your payroll records. They're going to ask you for your utility bills, and whatever you're claiming to have used that money on, you're going to have to just itemize it out with all the receipts.
Okay, good. Let's see, we've answered, I'm going through the question. There are 33 questions in the queue, so I'm gonna just move through them, try to combine them as much as we can. We've answered that question. William wants to know, what if our members are still submitting their tithes, hooray, and we're financially able to pay our salary and utilities, so we don't actually need the loan? Should we still apply for the SBA loan?
Well, I'll just say there's no needs test. So you don't have to prove that you are, that you have been economically hurt by this, but you do have to, the application does require some sort of certification to the fact that you need this loan. So you're not proving it, but you need to take a look at the verbiage on the application to make sure that you can, with integrity, certify what it's asking you to certify.
Excellent. Rajiv, with a great question that I think affects a lot of our churches, is will this program, the PPP, also help preschools or ECEs that are owned by the church with their payroll?
Absolutely. Assuming that the preschool has a separate employer identification number and that it is, well, it can either be a small business or a nonprofit, but either way, it certainly has less than 500 employees, so it should be applying as well.
All right, good. Let's see. Eric wants to know, can you commingle the loan fund in their general fund, or do we need to have an account just for the loan to prove the money is going to payroll? I mean, that's kind of the internal control.
Yeah.
So how would you advise churches to deal with that?
I would advise the churches to, when they receive it, to put it in a separate general ledger account. Doesn't need to be a separate bank account, but to book it into a separate general ledger income account. And then I would suggest that you have a separate account for on the expense side as well to show the expenditure of that amount.
Okay, good. Someone's asking if 2.5 months of their payroll is less than $10,000, should they just apply for the EIDL?
I would say so, yeah. It'd be a lot easier. As assuming that you are, like most people, having trouble finding a bank that you trust to process the PPP. I would, if I'm frustrated with the bank, finding a bank, I would go ahead and do it online with the SBA, the EIDL.
Okay,
But
excellent.
just be careful with that you're really just asking for the $10,000. You're not applying for anything more than that.
Excellent. We've had a few churches, a couple of these questions are about churches that had an appointment change in July of last year that may have affected how much they were compensating their pastor, or if they had a reduction in time, like from full-time to three-quarter time.
Yeah.
How does that affect any of this?
Well, it doesn't affect your ability to receive the money. It will obviously affect your average monthly payroll cost a bit, so that will be lower than if you had maintained the same level of clergy person. But ultimately, you will demonstrate that you have however many FTEs you have in those 8 weeks after you get the loan versus 2019. You might show a little bit of a decrease, and that could result in some of that amount being a loan.
Okay.
It really depends, of course, on all the employees that you have, not just the clergy personnel.
Diane, thanks. I was watching the chat window and also in the Q&A. There are some questions that folks have about other payroll-related expenses like workers' comp, FICA, stuff like that.
Yeah.
How does that figure in to this? Because they're not actually included in the actual loan you would apply for. So explain that just a little bit.
Right. You can't, when you're calculating those payroll costs, you're really just including gross wages. They're not going to let us include the employer share of the FICA. They're not going to let us include our costs related to workers' compensation, really nothing else except for the gross wages. Now, if, again, as per my spreadsheet, there's the deductions employees take out of their own paycheck to pay for their own pension and their own, let's say, share of their health insurance. Those are reconciling amounts that get you from the W-2 taxable income to the gross wages. So in a sense, you're adding those back into taxable income to get to gross wages. But the employer share of those things we don't get to include.
Okay, good. I've gotten this question from quite a few people. You mentioned it as part of the presentation, and I know we discussed it in the extended cabinet, but explain to everyone a little bit about the district superintendent's interaction with this. There were folks saying, is a charge conference required for this? How does that work into this, even including some of the stipulations in the Book of Discipline in terms of what it would require normally for a congregation to take on potential debt?
Right. Well, I definitely think you need to, as I said, talk to your district superintendent. I've heard from at least one who is already sort of putting out emails to group emails to let them know how what they need to do to schedule a charge conference. So they understand the immediacy of this, the urgency of it, and so work with them to make it happen.
Excellent. Let's see. I'm looking through the question. I'm trying to sort as I go here. I'm gonna skip that one. And I'm sorry, I can't get to all of them. The queue is rather large for questions. I'm gonna try to get as many as I can. And the ones we can't get today, I'm gonna encourage you to email Diane separately at the conference office, and she can try to field some responses to some of these.
I got an interesting one today. I'll share it with you.
Oh, please, yeah.
I get a lot on email as well, which is also a good way to get a hold of me. But I got a question about whether the amount of the Paycheck Protection Program that gets forgiven will be expected to be tithed upon. And I would say let's just wait and see. If that happens, we're all happy, right? But my guess is that it will not be tithed upon because it's a grant, number one, and because you're not allowed to use it for anything except those things that I told you about.
Let me read this question here. It came in a little bit ago, so I think you've already answered that. You've answered that.
There was another situation where, maybe I had one church that said that they had laid some people off at the beginning of February. Does that disqualify them from being able to get this loan forgiven, to apply for this loan and to get it forgiven? Well, if you receive this amount of money from the PPP and you want to hire those people back, then it will not hurt you. They want you to hire those people back.
Okay.
But you would need to do so by May 1st, though, I think, in order to make it work.
All right, I've got a question here from Pam. It's a little technical, but you'll get it. If your trustee chair does not want to sign, can you use someone else on the Secretary of State list?
Yes.
All right, that was asked, answered. All right.
Just make sure it's not an issue of the trustees as an entity not wanting to do this. It's more of a personal thing that he doesn't want to share his social security number maybe, but I would be careful to make sure that the trustees as a whole are not objecting to this action.
All right, so this has to do with a question you answered a minute ago. It's a little bit more in detail, but I think your answer can be helpful here. So the person says, this is Terry, she says, I've got a part-time pastor and 2 really part-time employees for an after-school program. No one is full-time. So the part-time employees have not worked since March 16th, because there's not been any school. So no after-school program. Can I apply for the Paycheck Protection Program for these people, or only the pastor, or no one because everyone's part-time?
That's a good question. Well, you can always apply for it, and just understanding that I think you have to include all of your payroll costs for the given time period. So you would just have to know that a segment of that amount that you receive from the program will not be forgiven unless you hire those people back, and you won't hire them back because we're still sheltering in place, right? Then there won't be any daycare. But so you would have to go in with your eyes open that some portion of this amount will not be forgiven.
Okay.
But I don't think you can apply for it by just including just the pastor's costs, because they're trying to look at the whole payroll. And so they will see that there's a difference between your whole payroll in 19 versus 2020.
Richard wants to know, can we go back in time at all from when the loan is received?
No, I think it has to be the 8 weeks. No, let me put it this way. There's, from the date you receive the loan until June 30th, you can choose what 8-week period you want to use. So there's a little bit of flexibility, but you can't start the 8-week period before you get the loan.
Okay. We're getting a few questions here. Maybe you can answer. Again, it's about the kind of the part-time situation. Since the process is predicated on full-time equivalent, or FTE, you know, how do you quantify a person who's like 6 hours a week or 8 hours a week? How would you render that on that kind of form?
Well, just to remind you, you don't have to do that piece to apply the loan, but if you want to go in already understanding what might be forgiven and what might not be, then you do have to adapt some sort of calculation that gives you an FTE. What I used, and I haven't gotten any instruction on that from related to this program, but I used the FTE calculation that's used in other IRS kinds of things, which I think was 120 hours a month was considered full-time. So there's a calculation. So you're adding up all of the hours of all of your people in a month and dividing it by 120, and that'll tell you what your FTEs are for that month.
Okay. I have another question here about someone is imagining that their church officers are going to be hesitant to put their social security number on the form. So does it depend on the bank, or the person's asking, could we use our employer identification number?
Well, you could do what I did, which is to just submit it by just not putting anybody's name there and just put nonprofit organization, you know, no ownership percentage or something like that, and see if they'll take it.
Okay, thanks. And then a good question from another congregation, from Pat, wants to know, what if your employees are from companies like Manpower or like a temp agency? Do they apply for the PPP, or can the church apply for it even though they're using, you know, temp employees?
No, you can't apply for it with temp employees, because the C is going to do that.
Okay.
You have to apply for only people that are the IRS understands as being under your employer identification number.
Got it.
Yeah.
We've got, we kind of have a unique question from Diana, who's part of a community parish that's actually not part of a corporation. So it's an association of 3 churches that share one 50% full-time pastor. So the payroll is paid by the community parish. The W-2s and W-3s are under the community parish. Are we able to participate? So you know this is Diana.
I know Diana. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. Yes, you should participate, and then you'll get the money, and you'll divvy it up between, if you need to divvy it up between the 3 churches, you'll do so based on their payroll, or you'll just hold it as a parish, you know, as a whole. So just because you're not incorporated, I see your point now. So, but I'm assuming this parish has its own EIN, so that's the way you'll apply for it. And then you can figure out how to divvy it up later.
All right. Then we got a question about a church that has a loan for solar panels, but it's not a mortgage. So it's, I guess I'm hearing in that it's not secured against the property, which does reduce the utilities. How would that factor in?
Yeah. I don't think it's going to factor in. I don't think you'll be able to claim the interest on that loan, and obviously you'll have lower utilities. So you'll have money for your payroll, and maybe you won't be able to use it all on payroll. I don't know. maybe there'll be a piece that you'll have to make into a loan.
Okay. Molly wants
But,
to know if, oh, go ahead.
well, but remember that it's all utilities. So there's a list of utilities. So certainly you pay more than electricity. You can, I assume you can include your water and your garbage and, lots of utilities, telephone. So, so include all of those as well.
All right, everyone, I have 42 questions in the queue, and we're going to tackle one more because we are coming to the end of our Q&A time. So if I didn't get to your question, I will encourage you to email Diane. She will do her best to respond to you. I know that I've been receiving some questions that I've been forwarding on to Diane as we prepared for the webinar, and I've received about 30 of them. So I've sent them on. So hopefully we'll hear and see Diane after she answers all of your emails in a couple of weeks. There's a lot of them. They're great questions, and I'm thankful for you putting them in, all right? So here's the last question from Molly. It's a great question. If we end up getting more loan money than we have qualifying expenses for loan forgiveness, can we just pay back the difference to avoid having it become a loan?
Yes, that would be my strategy.
And would they negotiate that with the bank at that point?
Yeah, I think at the point in which you do the math to see what your loan forgiveness amount will be, you're really kind of doing that yourself. You're taking the initiative to apply for the loan forgiveness. So you apply for what loan forgiveness you will qualify for, and you send them a check for the difference. There's no prepayment penalty.
Right, because my understanding, Diane, is that the federal government is forgiving the loan to the bank. So the bank then doesn't collect, the bank doesn't turn it into a loan because the government gives them the money that then in turn forgives the loan to the actual borrower. Is that right?
That's right. I will add that one of the other reasons that the banks and credit unions can be kind of cranky is because they haven't received any money yet. They have to front all of this money to us right now. So that's why they're being a little stingy too.
Yeah, understandable. All
Yeah.
right, well, Diane, we want to thank you for being with us. We've got a few more minutes of content, and I'm going to turn things over to our Director of
Great.
Communications, Selby Ewing. But Diane, we want to thank you for
My
all of
pleasure.
your expertise, and I'm going to turn things over to Selby. So Selby, turn on your video and your mic, and I'll spotlight your video. You should be good to go.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Wow, Diane, thank you so much for an incredible sharing of information. My head's just swimming, and I know that I'm probably not alone. So thank you, friends, for joining us, especially during this Holy Week. I want to ask you to be sure to check the conference website this week. Bishop Carcano has been doing Holy Week reflections since Palm Sunday, and they are available on the website. There's a link on the homepage, and it will take you to her meditation page where all of the reflections so far will be. We'll have another reflection tomorrow, and then on Saturday. On Friday, Bishop Carcano and lay leader Michelle Pope will be hosting a noontime Good Friday service. And that will be broadcast at noon, of course. And then on Easter Sunday, Bishop Carcano will be hosting a sunrise service at 6:15 a.m. Easter morning. Links to those services will be on our homepage. We're really excited about how those services are shaping up, and invite you to join us for a word from Bishop and from Michelle as well. I am so happy that so many of you have joined us for today's webinar. It's certainly a team effort, and I want to invite you to come back and revisit the webinar of Diane's, and also last week's webinar with Jason Moore. We are developing a page on our website where all of the webinars recordings will be posted, and any ancillary materials like the PowerPoint or last week Jason's handbook, they will be posted as well. And we will also be posting the schedule for coming Wednesday webinars. We're scheduled out till early June, and very excited about the content that is coming. Next week, April 15th, we're going to discuss the strength and strategies of clergy-lay partnerships, especially in a time of social distancing. So ways in which lay and clergy can partner to really build community all the time, but most especially in this time. Going further out, April 22nd, we're going to be addressing stewardship in online gatherings. So something that is so important in this time, and how do we bridge the digital divide and keep the tithing active and help fund our mission. April 29th, we're going to be looking at pensions and health care in this time of uncertainty. I mean, we always save for a rainy day, or we plan for a rainy day. Well, folks, it's raining. So how do we, how do we adjust our planning accordingly? So, and then May 6th, we're going to be looking at lots of different ways to cultivate community as we are in isolation. So all of these webinars are contexted to, as Craig said earlier, to work with all of the different conditions that are touching our lives in this time of COVID-19. And we know that a lot of the skills we'll be learning and the information that we're sharing will be useful when we return or when we move forward, hopefully to a less isolation, less shelter in place time where we are able to gather again. The technology that we're being, some of us are being sort of backed into as a result of this shelter in place, will be very, very valuable going forward. So we're very excited to be offering these webinars, and very excited you're here and you're interested and you're coming. Would also be interested to hear from you any topics that you would like to hear and you'd like to share. We're talking to different people around the conference, not just conference staff. We're looking at a lot of people around the connection to be presenters. So if you're interested in bringing forth a topic and interested in talking with us, please do. And reach out to us through the emails. And all of the staff are on the staff page. If you don't have our personal emails yet, they're right there. So I just want to just end with a word of appreciation and thanks for all you do every day, week in, week out in your communities to really strengthen and keep your faith family together. Let us also hear from you with the stories of that work. We really value what's happening in the grassroots local church, and those are the stories I'm, as a communications director, particularly interested in telling. So you can reach out to me and we can collaborate on a story, or you can send me a full story, and those will be appearing in the Instant Connection, which is our weekly e-newsletter. If you don't subscribe already, I would invite you to subscribe. We've got a very, very healthy list, and it's really a key way that we can communicate together. So it's not just the conference office saying, broadcasting information, it's really information sharing around the connection, which is so valuable. So if you want to subscribe, there is a subscription form on the homepage of the website. It's www.cnumc.org. And I would invite you to also visit our Facebook page and the Bishop's Facebook page, also our Twitter platforms. We share a lot of the Instant Connection articles throughout the week there, and we're really trying to build community on those social media spaces. So that's also sort of a mini opportunity that you can ask questions like we've done in this chat bar. That, you know, if you have a question about something you see or a response to one of the postings, let us know, because really we want to start building this digital campfire in as many places as we can, so that we can gather and share and get to know one another even better. So that's my pitch for all of our communications tools. And of course, you know, you and the conference, the people in the conference bring the value to any of that. So so I look forward to getting to know each of you as the weeks and months go, and I really look forward to hearing from you and hearing all the wonderful things you're doing to really impact lives in your community. Greg, that's all I've got.
All right, Selby. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for being with us. We're going to be back next week with another webinar. As you heard from Michelle Pope, our lay leader, we hope to see you then. Check the Instant Connection for information about how to register for next week's webinar. Really glad you could be with us. Have a blessed Holy Week on this Holy Wednesday as we prepare for Maundy, Thursday, then, of course, Good Friday, and Easter, of course, on Sunday. May the presence of Christ be made known to you all. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.